just before we get started, I think it's just useful to get a sense of who's in the room. And we haven't really had a chance to do that so far. So from our point of view, against the glare of the lights, because it is difficult to see the people on the left-hand side.
Maybe that's why everybody stood up.
Yes, cool. It's be really interesting to get a sense of, so in terms of the role that you have within your organization, who has a broad talent management or talent enablement role within their organization? So we sort of do a bit of a straw poll. Kamal, what would you estimate against the glare of the percentage of people who put their hands up around that? Is that a third or? 40%. 40%. I like the precision. In terms of those people who have a talent acquisition role within their organization? Okay. Put your hands up, because we really need to see those hands. Thank you. Make sure that you're awake too. And where are we up to on that one, do you think? 27%. I love the precision again. And those who've got a learning expertise, or maybe we call it learning and skills, right? And that maybe runs that out. So again, we're okay. Cool. And again, what a precise number? Down to the half? 31.5. Okay, that's cool. So it's really always nice to know who's in the room. And it just gives us a little bit of a sense of some of the flavor that might come out from your conversation as well, because we also want you guys to contribute to the session. I have a whole ream full of questions to ask our experts, and I was really mean because I didn't really give them those questions until yesterday. So they haven't really had much of a chance to prepare. And I like the frisson and excitement. I don't know if you do appreciate that last minute.
I haven't looked at them, so I'm really living on the edge right now.
Living on the edge. Yeah. That's cool. And Sarah?
I read them, which is a start.
So, right?
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. So, but what we're going to do is, we've got a question for you straight off the bat, right? And again, we've already really primed you a little bit in terms of getting used to putting your hands up. We know you're awake. So who believes that they have a great learning culture within their organization today? I mean, we want to see those hands go up who thinks they've got a great and amazing learning culture in their organization. Okay? Now, for those people who are part of Eightfold, please put your hands down. Right? Because we're asking the broader audience. So please put your hand up. For those people who think they've got an amazing, great learning culture. And again, Kamal, I need your input on percentage-wise, what do you reckon? 17%. 17%. That looks a little bit high.
I'd say less than 1%. Less than 1%.
Maybe 1%, right? Now, if you think how important learning is to our organizations, in some ways that is a bit of a shocking realization, right? If I was in front of a bunch of salespeople and said, who has an amazing sales culture in my sales team, I'd hope that everybody's hand would go up. Right? And we see this consistently in our research. So it's just something to sort of say, for those people who weren't paying attention, there's some people down the front that you might want to speak to during the break, or if you're open to it, we'd love to hear some of your input during the session. Cool, got some positive feedback, so don't let me forget where that one was.
I wish I wasn't so old, because I might be able to read his badge from here. But there we go.
I can't see that far. And the second question, is there another question? So, and the second question I have is, who thinks, putting the learning culture to one side, that they have a world-leading approach to upskilling and reskilling the people in their organization? So culture is one thing, but having a world-leading approach to upskilling and reskilling. Again, hands up for those people who think they've got a world-class approach. Wow. Yes. Okay. Now, that's fantastic news for all the people who work at Eightfold, right? But also great news for our panelists, because these guys have some incredible insight, right? From almost being able to sit inside organizations and know what's going on, but not just one organization, but many organizations. Because what we should do is get you guys to introduce yourselves and explain what you do, because I think that's the thing. You can almost get squirreled away in your own organization, in your own bubble. These guys have the insight, that objectivity, to let you know what the realities are. And that's my job today, is try and tease some of that out from them. So, Chrissy, I'd love you if you could explain to the audience who you are, where you come from, who you work for and what you do.
Sure. So, hi everybody. As I was beautifully introduced, I'm Chrissy Billingham. I'm the VP of Client Experience for the international parts of Degreed, so anything outside of North America. And my team and I are responsible for all of our clients immediately post-sales in perpetuity of that relationship. So what we do is work with our clients to help them really broaden and deepen the impact of using some technologies to increase on the culture and to increase on the approach that they have to some of these challenges. But more importantly, equipping and connecting with skills, with learning, and with driving skill increases across organisations. So, where I come from, I live in a very small town called Northampton, which is about an hour outside of London, about 60 miles north. But I've spent most of my career sitting in your seats. So this is only my second time vendor side. My roles previous to that have been cultural change across multiple organisations, mostly financial services. So I kind of walk both sides of the line, which is really interesting. So yeah. That's me. I've been at Degreed for about 3.5 years now, so I've got a kind of good depth of vendor side, client side, and the challenges that exist on both sides of that border.
And Chrissy, in terms of the sorts of organisations you work with,
Yeah.
they're sort of multinational, what sort of
Yes.
scale are they?
So some of the organisations that we work with are huge global organisations, people like PepsiCo, people like Capgemini, people like AstraZeneca, HSBC, to name a few, of our big financial services organisations that look like that, but equally we have much smaller organisations that we work with too. So the challenges are the same, just at varying degrees of complexity, I think.
Yeah, and that complexity of execution in
Yeah.
complex organisations.
Yeah, and also the challenges that come from smaller organisations that aren't resource heavy.
Yeah.
And they're kind of easier sometimes to work with because there's less complexity, there's less politicking, that's the word, and there's less kind of rub when you get cross-departmental and things like that. So yeah.
So I think it's an amazing expertise that hopefully we'll bring out from the questions we've got. I've got, as I said, I've got a pile of questions.
Yeah.
We're going to have to do a quick fire round at some point, I think, just to get through them all. But Sarah, it'd be lovely to hear your perceptions as well, and about where you come from and what you're doing and who you work with.
Fabulous. Well, it's great to be here. I'm Sarah King, TCS, so consultancy. So what I do is I head up the European HR advisory arm of what we do. And everybody, I think, is very familiar with Tata Consultancy Services. But what we do is we go to organisations and we talk about their HR challenges. And we've got a plethora of clients, across the globe. And we work with them to understand where they're going, what their strategy is, and how maybe we can bring our expertise and our experience with other clients to kind of help them go forward to get where their strategy is and really help HR take them forward with that. And the really kind of fascinating area at the moment is obviously people strategy, and what's happening in the talent marketplace is going so quickly that whenever you think you've got something that's world leading, and that's kind of why I like that first question is it world leading? Was it world leading 6 months ago? And what are you doing now to actually go forward with all the changes that we're currently seeing? So really fascinating area for me. I've always been in HR, either from the legal area or as an HRD, but I'm finding it really, really interesting to work with so many different clients with different challenges and different needs, but there are some areas that are so similar with skills, with where they're going, with the concerns about what their organisation is doing, how we're going to be agile with what we do. So yeah, that's what I do. It's a really, really interesting time to be in this area as well.
Let's get into the questions.
Yeah.
If you want to know who I am, look me up on LinkedIn. We haven't run out of time.
I could have just said that.
But I think, so we've had a little bit of this covered already, but in terms of the forces that are really driving transformation of skills agendas, Sarah, you said there's sort of these things happening. Are there sort of patterns that you're seeing? Are there tipping points that differ between clients? What are you seeing of those drivers? Because you hear about digital transformation, the pandemic, hybrid working.
Yeah, so
What's really
I think
playing out?
With what's happening, and we've kind of touched on it in most of the sessions so far, is just the speed of change. I don't think going into the pandemic, any of us would kind of have realised what that resignation and loss of skills and where that came from, and the fact that it's actually global in nature. So we're getting a lot more empowerment with the workforce at every level that we're seeing and through multiple industries. So people are saying, actually, no, this isn't quite working for me. I'd like to approach work in a different way, be that time, be that location, or be that, the flexibility to move in kind of a gig or a project way to do their work. So it's very interesting. And what's really fascinating from kind of a corporate strategic level is the way that company strategies are really elevating people, are elevating skills and saying to, the HR community, you are front and center now. What can you do to actually enable us to take forward our company strategy? There's going to be loads of transformation and change in that. And front and foremost to that is how our people, how those skills are going to be coming in. So it's very interesting the way that people and HR has been elevated, the way that experience is so important across the board, and the way that our workforce, our skills in multiple areas, multiple countries are saying, actually, we want more from this.
And would you say that's every organisation that you come in contact with, or is it a subset? Are there some nuances in there?
Interestingly, and I can't explain this, and maybe people in the audience can, I am seeing this in most industries. And I've never, normally when I see something's happening in oil and gas, it's moving in this way, and we can track a pattern and we can come in and help. But I'm seeing this in the finance sector, in retail. We're doing a lot of work with the retail clients, whereby their staffing challenges are really finding people, put them in the work scheduling. Not that actually they are starting to mobilise themselves in that, but we're seeing this across the board. Whether that's just, the experience that TCS in the European area we're getting or not, I don't know. But very, very interesting, the way that this is kind of going across the board, I would say.
And again, a random stat, 91% of financial services organisations said that they had struggled to fill a vacancy in 2021, right? And probably, everybody, right? It's one group that didn't, in a way, out of 10. You just think, that is incredible. So the pressures, I guess, through the Great Resignation and the changing environment. Is that what you also see, Chrissy?
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd add is competition.
Sure.
So not just in the industries that these organisations are part of, and we're alluding to it, the competition for talent. It's important to people when they join organisations, they're asking many more questions now. It's not just what am I paid, how much holiday you'll get. It's what's your culture look like? How are you building learning and development? What's in it for me, and why should I come to your organisation? And I think you see it across, sectors that you've kind of alluded to.
Do you think that's a permanent feature, though? Or was that just part of the Great Resignation, and we've got a lack of people to hire in almost before the potential recession? Is it just a moment in time, or do you think that's one of those sticky things that now it's here?
Yeah. I think it's a generational thing.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's really a generational thing. And as you look at, I hate to label millennials, because I don't think it is just millennials. But if you look at the talent coming into our marketplaces, coming into the world, they're asking for more. The request is for more, and it's for more instantly. And for what's in it for me, why should I have skin in the game? What's the output going to be? And I think that will continue in perpetuity. I think it will change, because I think it will become more of a challenge, is what I mean, because I think people will continue to want more. The trajectory will continue to be upwards, and I think organisations will have to step up to fill that gap. That's definitely what we're seeing.
No, I'm assuming that if I ask the question to the audience, who feels as though they need to step up because they're feeling a bit left behind, who would put their hand up? Right? So who feels they're being left behind? Again, put your hands up. We've got
We're blinded by the
light.
It's like the light of the sun.
Okay, so that's almost maybe 40%. So where are the others feeling, right? If you're not feeling as though you're left behind, do you feel as though you're on the right curve? Obviously, this gentleman, could you say what your name is?
Yeah,
of course, Miles. Thank you. So Miles at IBM says that they're ahead of the curve, and actually that's really representative of things I've heard.
Yeah.
If we could hold up 1 second, we have a roving mic, which is coming towards you. And for everybody else, if you've got something you want to say, right, we have a few people who are effectively acting as a catalyst for the conversation. So your voice from the audience, sharing the intelligence in the room, is really important. So Miles, thank you first for venturing forward, but also it'd be great for everybody to hear your story.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, speed is, almost you have to have exponential speed to be able to keep up.
Yeah.
So to say that IBM is doing a great job is true. Could we be doing more and more and more? Yes. So I don't think anyone can say that they're comfortable and ahead of the curve, right?
Yeah.
I think that also to add to your point around, the sort of skills and war for talent, ultimately the demographics are against you anyway.
Yep.
So if you look at, aging population, declining birth rates, et cetera, it's against us. And we thought that AI and automation was obviously going to replace a lot of the need for humans. That isn't going as fast and as effectively as we thought it would do. So I think it's going to be it's not just a blip and a short-term problem. This is a long-term problem.
Yeah, and I think the thing is too, when you talk about running at the right speed and being ahead of things, is often if you're too far ahead of things, you're guessing. And is that the right thing to be doing? To John's point in his presentation, how do we get that point in time and look at the skills that are needed right now, and how do we kind of pull that forward a little bit, but not too far? Because otherwise, we're guessing. We could be spending our time on the wrong things, so it's hard to run at the right speed. And I think organisations often run too fast or too slow, and it's hard to find that magic middle.
It's that culture of flexibility and agility as opposed to crystal ball gazing.
Yeah. Much more eloquent than me. But yeah.
But I think it's a really resonating story. And one of the things I think, again, for those people in the audience, to involve you, again, put your hands up. How many of you have transitioned to a hybrid workforce or flexible working? Okay. Again,
Wow.
I can sort of see. Okay, hands down. How many of you haven't transitioned to a hybrid workforce? Ooh,
Wow.
okay. Is that causing you problems? Again, I'm going to ask you a direct question now. If you've got roving mic, you may not have invited this question, so people will be wary about putting their hands up next time. But do you find that's a challenge now for your organisation when everybody else is going, actually, I quite like Friday afternoons, picking up the kids and working from home? So, the roving mic is coming in your direction.
Yes, absolutely a challenge right now with talent attraction, talent engagement, retention. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, we've got a gentleman at the front, just to bring in the conversation as well.
Nico Ori, Coca-Cola, your Pacific Partners. I do think that every time when we talk about hybrid work, we should not forget that 80% of the work population, and in our case, 70% of our workforce, is either working in a factory or is on the road.
Yeah.
So I think we should really not forget that.
Yeah.
And I think what you just described earlier, it's all, I think, now about the employee experience. So it's very important to put that in the right perspective of the personas, understanding what people need. What's underneath is the need for a bit more flexibility.
Yeah.
And I think the real challenge is not so much hybrid working, because that's relatively easy to achieve. It's how can we also bring to the other part of the workforce a bit more flexibility. And that's very challenging, I can tell you.
Yeah.
So there is almost this coming together both of remote working and hybrid working, right? Because there are people who are always going to be remote from maybe more mothership of learning interventions. I mean, interestingly, that segues very neatly into our next question. And anybody can think about planned. So the question is, how is a hybrid workforce or remote working impacting skilling and upskilling and reskilling and learning? And Chrissy, I'm going to chuck this one at you to start off with. And just to say, sort of, what challenges are you seeing organisations encounter around that sort of distance workforce and how they deliver learning, but also deliver upskilling, right? Because there's a difference between knowing something, but also doing it well. And if you're remote, you can't be sick. What are you seeing?
Yeah, so you'll have to keep me on track, 'cause that's quite a long question, quite a big scope.
Just run with it and we'll find out interest.
So I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we were working with a large pharmaceutical organisation out in Europe, and you'll hear me probably say two things thematically. One is perfection is the absolute predator of creativity. And the other thing I'll come to later is complexity. But essentially, what we found previously to the pandemic, and alluding to hybrid working, was that people strove for absolute, total, complete, and utter perfection.
Yep.
We can't possibly launch to our whole organisation. We can't possibly talk about reskilling or online learning or working remotely to our organisation, because they just don't do that. Everybody comes to the office, and that's how we work. Fast forward, I was having that conversation with this pharmaceutical organisation. Fast forward 6 weeks, and I got a text message at 11:30 at night from Denmark, and this guy saying to me, you can probably connect the dots to who the client is. This guy saying to me, Denmark is shutting down, everybody is going to be working from home tomorrow. What do we do? And I was like, yes. I spent 20 years in this business, and in the last 2 years, it's moved forward much faster than those 20 years because people have been put in the position where they have to do the things that we've been telling them they need to do for the last 20 years. And so for me, I think the hybrid workforce is impacting on upskilling and reskilling in a way that nobody kind of really expected it to, because it's forcing organisations to really think about, where does my talent sit? What job are they doing? Do I want them to do that job? Could they do another job now I don't require them to come into head office every day? Could I deploy their skill better somewhere else? Would they think about a different job now that I've always wanted them to do because they don't have to be in the office? And I think it's physical to an extent, but I think hybrid working is forcing the hand of organisations to really think more holistically about where their talent sits, the skills that they have, how they learn, how they consume learning, and how they push forward in a much more holistic approach instead of thinking about, okay, here's my people that work in the UK and they align to this function of the organisation. I think organisations are looking much more holistically now at that skill.
So it sounds as though there's almost this sort of move to not only being an agile business, but being an agile HR function.
Yeah, definitely.
So actually you don't look for perfection on the first launch, actually you go on your iterative, almost product development with your audience. Now, is that representative of what you're trying to do? Are you sort of moving in an agile HR direction? Again, please put your hands up, and it's really nice if we can see them. I promise not to pick on you now, although I might pick on you if you don't put your hand up. Maybe that's a different way. That drives the wrong answer.
Miles can be our default.
But Sarah, is that sort of, I think about the things that you're seeing with almost that agility mindset and execution, maybe, is that?
Yeah, and that, it all links back to the experience of the individual as well, doesn't it? So being agile isn't just because we've got a bunch of maybe more white-collar workers who are now working from home. That agility, that experience, and the learning in the way that's positive for the individual as well as the company, that applies to all sorts of workforces. So what we found really interesting is, yes, it was kicked into touch by the pandemic and people had to do stuff and really changed the way that learning worked, maybe from kind of 90% in classrooms to 0% in classrooms. But in order to do that, and the kind of learning they created was actually really positive to those on the shop floor, those in retail. So what I like about this, it's kind of democratized it. And the changes that have been made have been really beneficial to lots of people and given them more learning, more benefit to the company, but other opportunities, and actually better overall learning stats, which is really fascinating that we've seen in a number of companies. They've changed the way they've kind of delivered learning, the bite-sized nature of learning, the focus of it, the ability for employees to have choice. And that has kind of gone across the whole organisation. And the positive reaction has actually been larger in the area that they weren't even impacting in the first place, which is great and very interesting.
I think the other thing it drives, sorry, I warned you.
No, keep going.
is it drives creativity. L&D people by their very nature, and I'm not just talking about them in isolation, but L&D people by their very nature are quite creative. And I think sometimes there's a confine that comes with working in a big corporate. And I think what that hybrid workforce forces right across HR and people teams is creativity, creative thinking. How do I market? How do I engage? How do I measure? How do I distribute? How do I talk about data in a way that helps everybody to see progress, movement? Something, I've been there, I've done that, and something changed because I did that. And I think the creativity just becomes more and more important for me as we move. I think we'll see the needle go between hybrid and remote, and I think that the pendulum will swing a few times before it kind of settles in the middle. Yeah, exactly. But I could wax lyrical about that forever.
But you're also going to say about complexity. And maybe it's worthwhile just sort of jumping off on that point before we move on.
Yeah. So I talk about complexity a lot with clients. Almost every client I talk about complexity, and I think it's the stumbling block for a lot of the work that we do around reskilling, upskilling, learning. Because I think what we do, and I say we because I consider myself part of the problem too in some ways, is we overcomplicate the stuff that we're trying to do. We come at things from an organisational perspective, what the organisation needs, and we don't think about the learner as a consumer and what the learner needs or what that person in the equation needs or requires. And I think I'm not saying there's not a place for things like competency frameworks. I'm just saying, from an organisational perspective, you think a competency framework is important, but your learner or your person looking for skills or development probably isn't connecting that to a competency framework. They're crowdsourcing the skills that are required to do their jobs. They're contributing to the role profiles that are created for the people that are hired to work with them or come after them. And I think we just need to be a lot more agile and less complicated about the work that we do around skills, and think more about our consumers. Right? We're all consumers. We all know the answers to this stuff inherently, internally, because we know what entices us. But I think what we do as organisational functions is we just build complexity and complexity and complexity because it's the way that we've always operated.
And maybe that's a good jumping on point to the next question, in terms of what you're seeing organisations do that really help them transform skills and reskilling in organisations. What are they doing when you talk about learning, Sarah, for example? What are they doing? What is that sort of, what's the pattern of things they're delivering?
Yeah, so I think it all starts off with the attitude to skills. And within a number of organisations and a number of HR groups, people have got very hung up on the very specific skills that are there in their organisations that people must have in order to do X, Y, Z. And we already know, and we've discussed the half-life of skills and those constantly changing. But the important thing is not to get hung up internally, look externally and realise that skills may have a different nomenclature, but they're all out there. And the whole world, the whole organisation, the whole ecosystem is full of those skills and adjacent skills and ability to upskill and cross-skill and change. And the looking out, changing where you are actually standing is really key to understanding the broader picture, but also helping upskilling your own resources and those that you may bring in that, at the moment you can't bring in the perfect skill set, the individual that's got everything.
Yeah.
So really understanding what is possible and having that kind of AI opportunity view over the skill sets out there is really helpful, and actually showing that to employees, giving them that experience and making them part of the journey and go, actually, this really makes sense. If I go down this path, these opportunities are there for me. These skills mean something to me. It's not just an edict coming down.
And consistency, I assume, plays a really important role as you start to weave that through other people processes, be it giving feedback and performance management and some of the career conversations, or at a peer-to-peer level as much as it is as a manager.
Yeah, and to Chrissy's point, to eliminate the complexity in that, not to hide it in policies and weave it in and just make it this web that nobody has the wherewithal to deal with, making it really accessible, making it easy and making it meaningful. Both from an organisation and from an individual perspective.
And are there things that you see people do in organisations that make the cut through that complexity? Are there particular things that maybe tricks or shortcuts or
I don't know if
springboards,
it's
if that makes sense?
But starting off with a persona, so thinking about, who's going to do this learning? What are you trying to achieve? Who are these individuals? Who are the personas in an organisation? And then following their path, as opposed to kind of coming top down, goes, everybody does this. So we've found that, a lot of organisations are really taking that on board and actually building and thinking about it and getting people in workshops that understand from that persona's perspective. And that's a good way to start. It's a good way to open things up and focus where the focus is needed.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, I've got loads of questions still to go. How many have we done? 4?
Just quickly on that point, I'm
yeah,
really
sure,
sorry
go.
to pass
Please
on it.
go, jump into it.
I was talking to Max earlier before we came in the room, and he said, what is it you're going to tell us today then? And I said, nothing that you don't already know, and it's super true. So on that point, what am I seeing organisations do when they really get it right? It's super simple. Start with the end in mind. If you look back 6 months from today, what's different? What's going to have changed? What's the story that you can tell? What does that data look like? How do the people feel that work here? How does your CEO feel? What value are you adding to them? So think about all those that's where I see clients really succeed, is when they think horizontally, vertically, and they fast forward 6, 12, 18, 24 months if they can, but with the end in mind. It makes such a big difference because it keeps them focused and they know what they're trying to do.
Now, I was just thinking, Miles, in terms of what you've been doing. Again, the people who've got the mic. Where's the roving mic? You've got a long way to run now. Miles, it'd be all right if you just shared maybe some of the things that you think are cutting through and making this real in IBM. And if anybody else has got something like to add, I'd love to be able to pick on you too. And again, there's hands over here. So
yeah, just under the sun on the left-hand side.
I feel like I'm getting a suntan. Right, should put some sunscreen on. So Miles, please.
What exactly are you think? Rephrase your question slightly. What are you sort of thinking?
So it's more sort of, are there particular sort of things that you're putting into your initiatives to bring the skills to life? Is it about focusing on the managers to have those conversations? Is it about empowering individuals to think more proactively about their skills development, what it means to stand still even in their job, as well as move on? Are there things that you're starting to do, even around learning, right? Is it about digitizing learning, or you think about a particular type of learning that helps deliver that?
I think that one of the earlier speakers talked about personalization, and that's kind of critical. Yeah. So I think ultimately we want to use data and insight as the kind of the engine for this, not the kind of not wagging the dog, so to speak.
Okay.
So it's a lot of it. We've just appointed an individual, Obed, who's head of culture at IBM. So he's not like a head of talent or a head of talent development. He's a head of culture. Yeah. And so he's really, a huge part of this is cultural transformation. So when we're talking to external clients, the biggest issue they have is not just plugging in the right software. It's about changing culture. Sure. Because ultimately, a lot of people, especially generationally, are not prepared to feed the machine. They don't put anything on LinkedIn. They don't put anything. They don't use any of the systems. So you can use AI all you want and machine learning all you want to try to surface what you think is the right answer. But if people aren't putting the data in, it's going to be useless to you. And that's cultural and in terms of generationally.
That's really interesting you say that, because we at Fosway, we do some research once in a while, and one of the things that came out from our skills research, when you ask the learners and the organisation as well, how much time are you given to develop your skills? Just outside of the run-of-the-mill, just keeping on in the hamster wheel, just keeping ahead. And most, right, half said, I don't get enough time. Right? And when you said, do you get a little bit of time, it's like, that was like 75%, 80%.
So
it's only a small niche.
To give you a flavour, so a lot of companies obviously were doing this with DE&I, right? They had to start the ball rolling with targets. Because that was the way to try to drive behaviour. It's not actually the way to do it, but it's the way to start driving it. Same with learning. So IBM, there's a minimum, everyone has to do a minimum of 40 hours a year learning, basically. But most people, the average learning hours at IBM is something into the sort of 80s. So I did 200 as a partner, which obviously is a busy job at IBM, as you can appreciate. I did 200 hours of learning last year. And that's not enforced learning. Some of it is. But most of it is Netflix-style kind of learning. So it's like, you did this, you worked on this project, you would benefit from this kind of additional learning. It's a half-hour slot for this, it's that, whatever.
And I think that's fascinating, because I'm thinking the conversations that we've had with clients, or just reference conversations, and some organisations we spoke to say, part of the manager's bonus is dependent on the skills development of their team. If their team hasn't progressed, then they don't qualify for their bonus. That's the entry point. Right? Not about delivering the numbers, about developing the team so it can survive tomorrow. Now, that's really interesting. So people are starting to embed these things, and again, in very large organisations. Now, some people had their hands up over there, so I can't see you.
The mic's there.
It's like a moment from a revelation. So
I can see you. I can see you.
Alistair Antoine from Cisco. So at Cisco, the approach we've taken previously is we focused on leaders. So in terms of the training, we've had leader days where the whole company, goes offline in terms of leadership, and there's one full day dedicated to training of the leaders. This year, we took a different approach, and towards the point on agility. So we had 3 days this year for the whole company, and the permission for the whole company to go offline for those 3 days and really focus on learning. So a number of external speakers, that really, and the sentiment from across the company has been fantastic. And I think that also plays towards an earlier point you were talking about around what keeps people there, and what so the values and what's important to employees.
Fantastic. Again, we've got a few other questions. If you've got your own, please put your hand up and we can direct them to our experts on the panel.
There's one here.
I can't see that at all, so
Hi.
I'm blindsided completely.
No problem. Martin Stupka here from my products, and what I'm going to speak to, I think, I wish I could say this is what we do other products and where we're going to be hopefully in a short time. But you talk about, what can we do to cut through all of this to actually make it happen? I mean, culture, I think, very important. But I think language, the language of skills, I think certainly in our organization, I'm seeing in other organizations is, and I think you alluded to that, I mean, competency framework, great.
Yeah.
But how that competency framework actually, connects to what I do every day. Does a normal employee have the vocabulary to actually say, like, what are my skills? So I think providing the organization, both at the employee level and leader level, with that kind of consistent language, I think, of skills, through a taxonomy, ontology, or whatever that is, I think is also one of those kind of foundational things that without it's very difficult to make it happen for not the user and customer and the leader as well, right?
So true. One of the best pieces of advice, he's going to kill me in a minute.
No, keep
One
going.
of the best pieces of advice that I ever got given was the statement, which is simply a culture is a series of historical events, and the only way to change a culture is to do something different tomorrow. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it does start there. And to your point, that's such a great thing to be able to materialize, to bring to life. What's the vocabulary around skills? Because it doesn't have to be really long competency statements. It's individual words, and adaptability, agility, all those kinds of things that we've been hearing today. I'll stop talking now.
No, it's cool. But I think it's super exciting, right? I think we're at a time when actually the reliance on learning and upskilling is so incredibly important because of the speed of change. We've covered all that ground already. But actually trying to get it right and learn from other people in the room about what's making a difference is part of that sort of just getting that light through the door, or the bright light.
We're the only ones who complain about that light,
I will keep on going on about it for next week as well. But there's that whole sense of there's so much that we're having to cope with and enabling that culture. And I thought that thing about having a leader of culture in your organization, has anybody else got one of those? One, so 2, 3, 4. Again, for those people who want to take something back to their organization, maybe that's something to start to have a conversation with your HRD and your CEO about.
Yeah,
because it's so foundational, right?
It is.
But it's not something that I would have thought about necessarily. And so I was here listening to what Miles was saying from IBM. It's incredible, right?
And the other trends we're seeing, speaking about roles and going back to the hybrid workforce piece, we're seeing head of remote roles pop up all over the place.
Right.
All over the place. People are taking their remote work really, really seriously, and they're investing in the ways of working, the policies and the processes that support that by hiring the right people to set the stage to move them forward. So we're seeing that often now.
Okay, so we're getting down to, I think, our last 5 minutes or so, just to do a time. 2 minutes, okay. So we're going to do, I know, I was trying to get an extra 2.5 minutes, right? I was trying to negotiate, I failed badly. We're going to do a quick fire round. So this will have maybe a short answer. We'll see how far we get. So digital learning, critical pillar. People are suffering from digital learning fatigue. Any thoughts?
Yes. How quick do I have to take this? Yes, so there can be that. The important thing is to think about the experience, think about where the learning is heading. So if you've got a finite time for learning, make sure it's impactful, make sure it's what the employee wants, and listen to everybody while you're creating it.
Yeah.
And be agile, evolve that learning, evolve the way that people are receiving it. Think about all the different sorts of workforce that are going on, and then measure it and see how you're doing. So yes, of course, if it's a dull course, you're going to get that fatigue. But if there's something in it for me as an employee,
good call.
All good.
Two things I'll add to that really, really quickly. Miles, your point around personalisation is key. I'm not fatigued if I'm seeing things that I'm interested in and that I want to see and that add value for me. And the other thing is rethink about what learning is. Learning is a consumption of an article on the train on the way to work.
Yeah, and the thing is, when I think about learning, I will always think about a learning cycle.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm going to make this as simple as possible. You start a 6-stage one, I'm going to go for 4-stage because it's easier to remember. So input, action, feedback, reflection. Okay? Input could be from somebody you speak to, could be something you look up, could be a course, could be a short, bite-sized piece of learning. Personalize that, it makes it even more impactful. Action, actually do it for real in your job. Yeah. But if you can, get somebody to watch you and give you feedback about it. So the point of when you do your action, make sure that somebody has said, Whether it's a peer, a manager, a customer, what did you like, what did you not like about that? What could I do better next time? Take some time to reflect, either by yourself or with somebody else. Talk to someone or have a mentor. Come and say, how did that go? And then think about the next stage of input. If you can simplify it that easily and get people into that habit, you have got agile, continuous learning at scale. Right? It doesn't need to be, like Chrissy said, it doesn't have to be complicated. The technology can support us in our journey about, have I had that conversation with my mentor? Have I had the time to get Sarah to give me that feedback because she watched me do it? Those are the things that we need to prompt around digital learning, which I think helps us overcome fatigue. Now, I'm flashing on the big zeros, so we're out of time.
Oh, I thought you were going to rebel then. I thought you were going to rebel.
I'm too well behaved. But we had some great questions about blended learning that you could ask us about. Yeah. We had some questions about learning culture that we sort of covered through interactions with the group. And we were going to ask you some great things. There were so many questions around ecosystem that we never got to. But we will be around, I think, for part of the day. Yeah. You can always pick our brains. But thank you for being an interactive audience and showing that you're awake by putting your hands up. It's been an absolute blast. Thank you so much.